Ladies, welcome to Women of Valor Week 18. It has been a long time coming, but this evening's Women of Valor centers on a woman in the New Testament, New Testament that went by two names. She had a Greek name and a Jewish name. And so tonight we are talking about Tabitha, which is her Aramaic name, also known as Dorcas, which is her Greek name. So Tabitha, or Dorcas, her name in both languages translates to gazelle. And the interesting fact about that is that it's an animal that cannot be offered as a sacrifice to God.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that a beautiful analogy? So let's actually go right into the word and open up in our Bibles to Acts chapter 9, and we'll begin at verse 36. So I'll give you a moment to get there. So reading from the New King James Version, it says, "At Joppa, there was a certain disciple named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and charitable deeds, which she did. But it happened in those days that she became sick and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in an upper room. And since Lydda was near Joppa, and the disciples had heard that Peter was there, they sent two men to him, imploring him not to delay in coming to them. Then Peter rose and went with them. When he had come, they brought him in the upper room, to the upper room, and all the widows stood by him weeping, showing the tunics and garments which Dorcas had made while she was with them. But Peter put them all out and knelt down and prayed. And turning to the body, he said, 'Tabitha, arise.' And she opened her eyes. And when she saw Peter, she sat up. Then he gave her his hand and lifted her up. And when he had called the saints and widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all of Joppa, and many believed on the Lord. So it was that he stayed many days in Joppa with Simon, a tanner." Amen. So that was what? 8-9 verses. 8-9 verses. Such an impact. So for a minute, let's do a little recap of our previously studied Women of Valor. Tell me about how they were introduced to us in the Bible. Give me some examples. What were they doing?
The woman with the issue of blood.
Okay.
Getting water.
Olga, she was introduced as the priestess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kendra, you were getting ready to say?
I was saying we had the woman at the well.
Mm-hmm. Melva, you were getting ready?
Well, a few of them, their introductions were because of sacrifices. They were introduced because of sacrifices they made for others.
Mm-hmm. So for some, they were in the middle of doing their everyday duties, gathering water like Rachel or Rebecca. They were at the well drawing water, or in the middle of heartache, like Tamar and the widow.
Or Hannah.
Yeah, like Hannah, right? But unlike many other women of the Bible, whom we are immediately provided with their marital status, their family status, how many kids they have, or whether or not they're barren, we are instead given the depths of the character of Tabitha. We are never made known as to whether or not she is also a widow, or whether or not she has children. That's not what was important in this story. And if you notice, these characteristics that are made known to us are right in line with our Proverbs 31 woman of noble character. Tabitha is the only woman of the Bible who is directly called a disciple.
Disciple. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the Greek word used here was mathatria, which means female disciple. And if you take this word out of the whole sentence, you miss an important detail. The sentence reads, a certain Mathatria, or female disciple. And what this tells us is that she's not the only female disciple, but one whose story left a remarkable impact on those around her. So we have been recorded disciples in the Bible. We are not counted out. And right after it tells us about her identity as a disciple and her good works, it tells us that she got sick and died. Her good deeds didn't save her from sickness. Her charitable works didn't stop death from reaching her door. Your good works do not make you immune to this world. It was her faith that shaped her character, and her faith that shifted the story to one that commands the attention of today's females and followers of Christ everywhere. An illness, and I have to say this slowly, an illness does not mean that you failed God, or that you didn't have faith, or that you're being punished, or that God doesn't see you. The question is, what will you allow God to do in your life to get the glory? She was known for her charitable works before all of this, but what happened in that room became known all over the world so that God could get the glory out of this, the sickness that the world placed on her and the death that was a result of the curse of this world. God still got the glory out of that. So who she was prior to Acts chapter 9:36 was so instrumental to the women around her that their broken hearts from her absence called them to go beyond the natural and to seek out a miracle. She caused them to operate in faith and to reach out to someone who is familiar with and a witness to Jesus raising someone from the dead. She may not have been immune to sickness, but death was not the final say for her. These women sent two men approximately 14 miles, probably on foot, to go seek help because they heard that Peter was nearby. Today, we want to know the weather, right? We look outside, we don't believe what we see with our own eyes, so we pull out our phones or whatever devices, we go to the weather app, we make our own judgment based off of what we saw outside and what we have in our hands. And that's what we do, right? We make our own judgment based off of what we see in our eyes and whether or not we accept that. They simply heard that help was nearby and sent someone 14 miles away on the possibility of a changed outcome. So how far will you go for a possibility of a changed outcome in your own life? I don't know many people today walking 14 miles because they heard they might. And that's just only half the trip. I drove almost 900 miles that I might make it to my brother in time. One way. On a possibility. And God was faithful to bring me there. So how do we get discouraged on the possibility before the journey even happens? Is that what you guys go through? Talk to me, I want to hear it.
I think other people can discourage you before the journey. Like if you can have like a conversation with God and then you understand what it is that God wants for you, and then you end up sharing that with somebody who doesn't know God, and then in comes the devil's opportunity to use that person to make you kind of waver in what you think, in what God has already, not what you think, what you know that you're supposed to do. But then you have your person, your doubters, your naysayers that come in and then tell you that, that's great. Like, why would you do that? Why would that doesn't even make sense. Like, how do you know that that's going to happen? You haven't, you said we look to our phones and all these other things to see on our own and don't kind of go on faith. You have people that'll come in and shake that faith when you verbalize what it is that you're doing on faith before you've even begun to do so.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because let's look at this image here. Let's look at and try to understand what happened. Not only did Tabitha have a sickness that led to death, but these widows, they took time to wash her. They took time to prepare her. They carried her lifeless body upstairs to an upper room.
They only had 24 hours. So if Peter took, if he took a longer time, it was going to be past the time that they would have to bury her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's why they said, we urge you to come quickly, right? How long does it take you to walk 13 miles and then back?
I hope they had a horse.
I hope they had a horse. Right, exactly. But let's look at that even further. Like I said, and like Aaliyah pointed out, we look at the possibility and what's in front of us. They had a dead body in front of them. What is more final than that?
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about she wasn't feeling well. We're not talking about it looks like this might be it. Her spirit had left her. It clearly says Peter turned to the body and said, Tabitha, arise. There was nothing left in her except the faith that filled the room. So when we are met with an impossible situation where no hope, no chance in the natural is possible.
They had to have hope because they called out.
Right. Well, in the natural, you can't. Like, this is definitely a spiritual battle.
Mm-hmm.
And so what the world sees is there's nothing left. Walk away. Why are you still trying? You're sending someone to walk 13 miles for someone who is no longer breathing. You washed her. This is not like, maybe she's in a coma. You washed her and you carried her. You know that there is no life left in her. How far will you go for faith and hope on what looks like is dead, on what is dead? Because this is a resurrection we're talking about, not even the appearance of death. How far will you go to completely turn something around? That's a good question. Because this is what Tabitha is showing us. Go ahead, Mother.
I find it interesting to, when it says, but when Peter prayed, he put them all out and knelt down and prayed.
Mm-hmm.
Why did he put them out?
He was mirroring what Jesus showed him. Because when he went to go heal, I think it was Jairus's daughter.
Talia.
Because of everybody's unbelief too.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, you put unbelief out the room. They had faith, they had hope.
There it is. There it is.
But what did he see
there it is.
when he was in the room with Jesus? Everybody leave.
Yes.
This is between me and the Lord.
Right. And I point that out because a lot of times when the Lord leads us to go, and we get there, a lot of times that fear of what if will lead us to keep people in the room when we know in our hearts they're not supposed to be in the room.
Mm.
And then doubt comes because, you know, of the unbelief that's in the room. So a lot of times the journey that we take, we're going to be in the room, just us and the person by ourselves.
Can I just
By
say
ourselves.
something? Because this is what came to me, and I know that you said he was mimicking Jesus, but this is me. Okay, this is what came to me. It's like, okay, let me kick everybody out in the room, just in case it doesn't work. Nobody knows what I'm doing.
Yeah. But that's a true statement. That's a
what
true thought. That's a true thought, because when the Holy Spirit starts to move us and direct us, sometimes this seems crazy, but because of the faith to know that he is able to perform miracles, he is able to do exceedingly and abundantly above all that we can ask or think. He is able to supply our every need according to his riches and glory. He is able. But is everyone else in the room, are they in a position where they believe that he's able? They know that he can, but do they believe he's able?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Like I
I think
said,
not every plan or conversation or interaction that you have with the Lord is meant for everybody in that moment. Sometimes it's just for you.
Right. Yep. That's true. And sometimes, sometimes we have to go at it alone, just with Jesus. Just you, us, and Jesus. That's it. And sometimes it seems rough because we're used to talking to our brothers and sisters. We're used to asking someone, who's going to give us, who we know is going to give us godly counsel. What do you think? This is what's going on. What do you think? But sometimes when we're in that place where we know that nobody can help us but the Lord, we have to go travel the road less traveled. That's you and Jesus. You and Jesus, the road less traveled, in order to bring people to Christ.
now let me ask
In
you
order
guys,
to bring people to Christ.
let me ask you guys this. Are you guys willing to accept a blessing? You say that.
Everybody- Yeah.
Right? We say that.
Yeah, I'll take one. I'll
But
pick
if
one
you're
up.
in the room, if you're in a funeral parlor and someone prays on that body and it gets up, are you sitting down or are you running out?
I'm running.
I'm running. Yeah, in my experience, when a body that was
I'm with
deceased
Nana
sits
and
up,
Lee on this.
that's not nothing good ever. Nothing
I'm
good.
running,
Has followed
and
that.
I might even jump.
Now, for me, if I know, in my heart that the person is sincerely praying for God to move, and this person gets up, I'm staying there because I'm next in line. I'm next in line. Wait a minute, miracles happening here. What? Wait a minute, come back. Come back. Because there are miracles happening there.
I'll be watching from a distance.
But do you see the difference in the response?
I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna be watching from a distance because it can go one or two ways.
That's all them
wait a
zombie
minute, hold
movies
up.
watch.
Yep, like Alicia
What's
said,
out of
all them
place
zombie movies will
on
teach you.
me.
You should probably go right about now, right? These are honest answers, right? I asked you a moment ago if you were willing to accept the blessing. Everybody nodded their head from those that I could see, right? But then when I had to explain the blessing, y'all were ready to run in the opposite direction.
But see, was that a blessing for me or a blessing for the deceased? Because
Isn't that what you guys prayed
that's
for?
their right to accept, that blessing. I just need to know that it's a blessing. Remember, that's not a conversation that God had with me. That was a conversation between somebody else. I'm just minding my business. Now,
you said I'm not a bystander.
You could be there to bear witness.
There, right.
But this is my point. He had to kick everybody out because who knows what their reactions would have been like watching this process.
He might scare her to death.
Exactly, right. It was easier for him to present her to them,
Right.
than it was for him to keep them in the room.
Yep.
We have Doubting Thomas, right? That's forever his nickname because he wanted to see and touch the holes in Jesus' hand. A disciple that walked with him for how long? That witnessed him do miracle signs and wonders, but still needed to see the holes in Jesus' hand and touch him on his side. We want the blessing, but we question it. We run from it sometimes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, like I said, how I would react, but how did, they react at that time when they saw Jesus doing it, when it was actually in front of them.
Mhm.
And you think about it, Thomas was there when Lazarus was, like they brought Lazarus back. So it wasn't like they haven't seen any resurrection.
Right.
Right. Brought back.
Right.
Matter of
So-
fact, Lazarus wasn't the only one that came out of the tomb.
That's another story for another day, but yes, be careful who you call out, right? By name.
That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
I need to hear every word out of this man's mouth while he praying over this body that then brought this body back.
Exactly.
I need
So-
to know if you was really praying and who you was praying to.
So
before I
here
went.
we have a blessing that we prayed for, that these women prayed for, that they cried for, they mourned over, they sent messengers for, and they had to be removed from the room. I mean, just in this group of us 10, we had some various reactions like, I don't know. I know I washed this body, right? I know I prayed for it, but I'm about to fall off the roof of this upper room trying to get out because I don't understand what's happening here, right? You might not understand how your blessing comes. And it may come what looks like late. God is never late. He is always on time. And he shows us that even in this, even when we think the story is over, it's just another chapter.
Matter of fact, they're bringing her back wasn't for her, it was for everyone else.
Of course not. Why would it be for her to go
Yeah.
to go from glory back to this? Like, thanks, y'all. I get to die twice. Like, no, no, it was not for her. It was for God to get the glory and for everyone else to realize that and to come to faith.
I would just wake up and be like, oh man, can I do this again?
Yep, it says she woke up, she looked at Peter, she probably shook her head, took his hand, got up, right?
I was talking to the Lord. He told me that you was calling me back.
We're gonna talk about this later. But think about what these widows were going through. They cried out for the life of Dorcas. They already knew pain. They were familiar with loss. They accepted the heavy burden of the title widow, but they refused to accept losing someone who saw them when the world refused to see them, someone who provided for them when the world forgot to set aside provisions, and they refused to lose someone who represented Christ.
If you look at her name, and you said it was like gazelle, a gazelle is a very graceful animal. And when I was reading this, I said, she was God's grace. From the way she was to others, she extended grace to someone that wasn't being given to them, but she extended it to them.
She operated in grace.
Yes.
Grace came in the form of Jesus. She operated through her knowledge of Jesus because she was trying to, like Peter, mimic Christ in her discipleship.
Mm.
And she showed them grace. She showed them mercy. She showed them love. So today, I want to remind you to represent Christ so much that people either weep for your absence or pick up the cross you left behind and continue the mission. It's not you, but the Christ that lives within you that should have people looking for the next encounter with you. That next dose of love, the next dose of truth, the next dose of care, that next embrace from the Father that says to all the widows in the room, you are not forgotten. That is who Dorcas was before she died the first time. So the question is, two things. Who are you spending your time with today that will remember you enough to pray for you during your time of need? And are you showing others Christ when you're with them? Or are you showing them the world? These widows didn't just cry and pray, they sought help. They showed them everything. They showed Peter everything that she had made, what she had done for them. They already lost their husbands. But Dorcas, Tabitha, she represented Christ to them. Who do you
The
represent
loving,
Christ to?
caring. She used her talent, what the gift God gave her to for others.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't hide it.
Yeah. Janaya, you mentioned, meeting some new friends and having a new friend group. Are you representing Christ to them? Rhetorical question. You don't have to answer if you don't want to.
Well, I did mention Bible study and stuff like that today when I was gaming with them,
Mm-hmm.
and how you lead a ministry.
But remember, it's not always like having to, when you lead by the things you did. Like she did clothes for people that didn't have clothes. It's not always saying Christ, 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 or just the Bible.
She led by example.
Yeah. So you
It's
can
when you
lead,
see, when you see
people can say,
injustice being
wow,
done.
I think she's a follower of Christ because of this, or, just her behavior.
Something that's going to draw you nearer to that person. You just want to know that person. You want to get closer to that person because there's something about them that you really like. And it's different from the world.
You know what I noticed? You will either stir up one or two things in someone else. Either the Christ in someone else or the demons in someone else.
Yeah.
And the same thing as to what they might stir up in you. And I notice when I encounter people who the Christ in me stirs up the demons in them. Or the Christ in me recognizes the Christ in them, and our spirits combine and we pray and we minister to each other, and it becomes a whole moment of just God filling the room.
Well, how about the flesh in them brings out the flesh for you?
That too. Yep, exactly.
I found that in high school, I was always able to lead by love. There was someone who back then I was friends with, I no longer am. And halfway through, I think our second school year together, she informed me that she was going to become a witch. And, it was very interesting, but I kept just loving her, and we had a respect for each other. When things got really bad for her, I asked if I could pray for her. She told me that no one had ever asked, they always just did. And that me always loving her and being patient with her and asking anytime she struggled at all, we would pray. And we would pray to God, Jesus Christ. It wasn't to what she believed in then. And I saw that the love that I had given her had kind of unhardened her heart. And I think because the way that she spoke was a lot of hatred is what she had. And so when I filled that with love, I think about that all the time, just how me asking and being loving even still is what made her open and sometimes even wanting.
think you broke up there for a second. Nope, you got it. Okay. But that's a perfect example, Janaya, because we have a lot of examples of the label Christian. And it's those who maybe were raised in that setting, but don't have it in their heart. They maybe some that weren't even raised, but it sounds good. It sounds like a good title. And they walk around telling people, yeah, I'm a Christian. But when you see the difference of someone actually having a relationship with Christ, it changes how you respond to people, and it changes how you respond to trouble. And Janaya, what you did for her was you responded to her pain and trouble with a Christ-like love. And a perfect example of that is you asked permission, because Christ doesn't force himself on anyone. He offers. He stands at the door and knocks.
It was hard for me because honestly, I was scared when someone gets into something like that. It's dark, it's daunting. And I could tell that a lot of it was the pain that she was going through, where she had a struggling relationship at home and her childhood cat had died. And I felt like I was automatically a horrible Christian out of association. But then I reminded myself that all the disciples that Jesus was with was also sinners, and that he led by love, and he led by example, and he led by forgiveness, and he led by patience. And I think because I came at her with love and kindness and patience, and, you know, I was the one who's always there listening to her pain about everything going on, we had a respect for each other where, you know, she said that she would never do anything towards or against me because I respected her. And that when it really came down to it and she needed someone and she needed direction and I asked, she was more than okay, because I kind of just led with that same mentality. Like I was really scared. And then I remembered, you know, all the disciples were sinners.
Yeah, there's a level, you'd be surprised at the amount of people, because I always get told that I'm not everyone's typical Christian. Like when they think of a Christian or someone who believes in God, I'm not the typical person that comes to mind, because we have a conversation and you'll tell me about yourself and I'm just sitting there and I'm listening. Like there's no judgment being passed. You are living your life, and by all means, I hope that, you know, whatever your sins are, like we all have, that you eventually come out of those sins. I'll be praying for you personally, but I'm not like, a lot of people expect confrontation when they come into contact with Christians. Now, whether that be from experience personally or what they've heard about Christians or what they've seen on social media about Christians or whatever. And it's always disarming for them when, you know, I have people in the office that don't believe. He's like, I'm an atheist. And I was like, oh, okay. And he's like, yeah, I used to be in the faith before, but there were a lot of things that were going on in the church and I didn't like that. And so I don't really lean one way or the other. Genuine good person though, right? So I'm just like, oh, okay. I said it's always interesting to meet people of different backgrounds and perspectives, you know, because I didn't live your life. I wish you well, not condemning you. I hope you do find your way to the Lord again, but also in the same way that, you know, I wouldn't want you on me like, oh, you should be an atheist because of X, Y, and Z, and none of this. I don't need you questioning or trying to test my faith. And regardless of whether you have a faith or not, I'm not going to do the same to you. Now, know that I'm always here for a conversation and we can always talk about it. But I'm never just gonna, like Janaya said, I'm never just gonna be like, oh, you know, you just need to do this. Oh, you're doing this wrong and this is horrible, unless you're doing something like you're it's like unlawful at this point. Like, oh, hey, you stealing. Maybe you should not do that. Like, it's like things like that. But you know, otherwise, okay. But you know, because I'm not here. It's not my job is not here to come here and pass judgment on you. My job is to be here to help you. And you can't help somebody until they are ready to be helped. So a lot of the times, like preaching to someone that is not ready to be to give their life over to God moves them farther away. And then you end up in like this battle of knowledge where they're trying to test you. It is, yeah, but it's always disarming for people to have those interactions with me because that's not what they're expecting at all.
Yep. And
Adding
again,
on
that's,
to what,
go
sorry,
ahead, Naya.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was saying, adding on to what Aaliyah was saying, I think too is that people who, you know, don't believe may not also understand the difference between corrupted organized religion and true loving faith. And that when you see that there's actual love and life behind the words that are being spoken and the way that people are connecting with you and people care, rather than corrupted organized religion where it's about money or prestige or yada yada yada, it rehumanizes what was always meant to be human. That's, you know, literally that's why Jesus came down. He became half man. He made himself. It's supposed to be a human connection. It's the whole point of it.
And you brought up some really great examples, because that's the point. Like whenever anybody asks me what my position is on anything, I say, well, what does the Bible say? Let's go to the word. Because it's not about an organization. Man created that. God gave us the word, in which is a manual for us to live, to follow, to know him. Because that word is his character. It is who he is, and it shows us who he wants to be with us. And so I'm not partial to titles. I'm not partial to, you know, like you said, mainstream organized anything. As far as, now don't get me wrong, God is very organized. God is very purposeful, and God created certain positions that are in the Bible, labeled, written out for us to understand who is the head and who is the tail and what gifts we have. That is completely different than the fact that we have 80 titles, 80 different types of, and I'm throwing a number out there, of this type of Christian. There's only one type of Christian if you're reading the word and not cherry picking what you believe out of it. And that's it. That is our foundation for everything. What does the word say? So show Christ, even if you can't speak about Christ to others, like we did when we were in the military. Even if you can't speak about it, you can still show people an example of who Christ is by the love, by the acceptance, by the trust, by the hope that you have in your response to whatever circumstance comes at you. You are showing people who Christ is.
And that's even more powerful, because actions mean so much more than words. And, you know, that's why I made the distinguishment between organized religion and corrupted organized religion. Because, you know, there's nothing wrong with things being organized. But it's there's so much just word and you don't see the action. I feel like sometimes having, like Aaliyah said, having just the action and then people finding out, oh, this is what the true love of a Christian is. It's not pushing things onto me. I'm actually more open and I'm wanting to hear and I'm wanting to listen, just as you've done for me.
Right. It's done with love and not judgment. Because in every encounter that Jesus showed us with someone that the world rejected, he didn't question them. He didn't say, well, renounce this first and then I'll come eat with you. You know, stop being a tax collector and then I'll come over to dinner. Stop being this. You know, he told them, go and sin no more. But he still sat with them and showed them the love of God, who is still looking to reconcile with his people, with his children. We have a tendency to, this world has a tendency to label and cut off. I didn't see Jesus do that anywhere. And that doesn't mean that you accept the sin. But how do you show love?
I did see the Pharisees do that.
Right. Pharisees did that. You continue to show love. That doesn't mean that you engage in what's happening that is identified as a sin. You love anyway. So I want you guys to take note that we don't hear anything about Dorcas's life after Peter presented her alive. If we followed her after the resurrection, we might try to pick apart every bit of that and apply that to ourselves. And that's not the point. The focus isn't on after. It's that God did a mighty work in a believer, but not because of her faith, but the faith of those around her. We heard about a lame man who was lowered into a roof, right? So that Jesus could heal him. Jesus tells those that lowered him that their faith was great, their faith was beautiful. Not that the man's faith was great or beautiful, that those that brought him on his mat and lowered him through the roof, their faith was great. And for that, their friend was healed. And that's what we see in Dorcas. She had such an impact on the women around her and on the ministry around her, because again, she was labeled a disciple. And no other female is directly given that association between their name and that title. But her faith, her charitable works, her heart, her Christ-like attitude towards others, her looking after what Jesus always, not Jesus, but even the law in the Old Testament, the widowless, the widow, the fatherless, and the stranger in your land, to take care of them. And that's what her ministry was. She was taking care of the widow. She was providing for those that were abandoned, that had no covering. And it was this that caused them to cry out on her behalf. God knows what's best for every one of our lives. And like you said, Mom, Peter might have been thinking, what if this doesn't work? Very human response, right? Instead, I'd like you to switch that thought to, what if God chooses to answer this differently? Because it's not that it works or doesn't work, because it's not through us. It's through Christ.
Mhm.
So what if God chooses to respond to my prayer request in a way that I can't see is an answered prayer?
And that's what we have to remember, because we think it's us. And it's not. We're just the vessel he's using. So whether it happens or not, it's that fear of failure.
Yep. That is definitely the devil's
Very true.
tool, fear. Yep, add fear of failure to that very thing, because we go about this all the time. 365 times in the Bible is written, do not fear. How powerful could fear be if we let it, since God had to write about it 365 times for us to get it? We've got 66 books, 365 times it reminds us, hey, do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. And every one of y'all wanted to run out this room except for Melva. When I asked if somebody was being resurrected, would you stay in the room? Let's be real, right? How many of us are now like track athletes?
Yeah, I can see myself pushing somebody out of the way.
Right. We hitting all the finish lines. I've never been a jumper in my life. I'm probably clearing some hurdles. Like, I'm short. I got no business clearing hurdles. I would clear some hurdles that day. It's a very natural response. No shame in that. But the word says, do not fear. So when do we stop letting fear overcome our minds and dictate our actions and reactions to what's happening in this world, to what's happening in our lives? And here's something else that comes to me. Stop asking yourself, what did I do to deserve whatever's happening in my life? And start saying, how can God use this for his glory? Instead of, why am I going through this? Haven't I done this? Haven't I done that? Aren't I a good person? Aren't I your daughter? Yes, you are. And because you're my daughter, I can trust you with this. Because you know that this isn't the end of your story. Can you trust God? Can you trust God to do exactly what he said he would do? When it doesn't feel like you're being protected, when it doesn't feel like you're being watched out for, when it doesn't feel like you're being saved, will you trust God? Tabitha, we have no words between she became sick and died. So we don't know if she felt fear, if she doubted, if she cried out to the Lord. We don't know that. And I don't want to speculate on that. But what we do have is an answered prayer for all the women who were in that room that didn't have a covering, but lost an example of Christ that was providing for them. So this story of Dorcas is that her heart and faith inspired the hearts and faith of those around her. And it encouraged them and caused them to move so that a mighty miracle could be done. So that we could know that miracles didn't just end with Jesus when he ascended, but through Jesus, we are healed. Through Jesus, we rise. And through Jesus, we are restored. She was healed in Jesus' name. And Tabitha was a woman of valor because she was a disciple of Christ first. And that's what I urge you to do. Go over your lives and ask, am I a disciple of Christ? We're not looking for perfection. I said that from day one. There's nobody's perfect. But how can I take who I am today and reach just a little bit more towards Christ? How can I change my response to, and I always go to this, to traffic, to bad traffic, right? Traffic in our lives, whatever that is, whatever that traffic jam represents in your life. How can I change how I respond to whatever's coming at me so that I respond a little bit more with Christ? Less of the flesh, more of the spirit. This is how we become women of valor. The impact that she left was so heavy that they sent people on a journey in mere hope that she would be restored. Her ministry was not only in her life, but it was in her death. Every one of us has the opportunity to minister to others. In the grocery line, while we're picking up our mail, when we're talking to our neighbors. Anytime we run into someone, we have a chance to show who Christ is. Simple
Just
smile.
giving a smile.
Yeah, simple smile, letting someone ahead of you, even though you really don't want to. Like, go ahead, what's the rush? I'm here until God says so, so go ahead.
Remember that when you're driving.
I've been exercising that lately. I've been exercising that. Yep. But how are we showing our examples of Christ? And it doesn't just stop there. What happens when you mess up? Don't let the devil get the victory and leaving you down there and you kicking yourself.
That's why it's so important to do Bible study, to do like Zoom, because if we don't, we get just part of the world, would just get filthy. And this is, you got to keep on feeding your spirit, feeding your spirit.
Yep. Encouraging each other, because that's what those widows did. They encouraged each other to find a way, and they found a way. Had it been one, they might have washed her, left her there, and said, okay, well, this is over. Two, they might have still washed her, carried her upstairs, said that was a lot of work. All right, I guess we'll come back in 2 days. But how many did it take to build up the courage to say, no, there's more to this story? I can't let this be the final chapter. I can't let this be how this ends. That is why it's important to fellowship. Because then we start operating in exactly what I said, fear. Do not fear. We let the reality of what's in the room dictate how we respond. Well, how about you let the reality of what's in the spirit change your mind? Yep. I love that Tabitha is outlined for us, like I said, in what, 9 verses. And she never speaks in these verses. Everyone speaks on her behalf. So what are people saying about you? What will people say on your behalf? I know that's a heavy question, but we're still here, right? We have time and opportunity to make sure that whatever is said about us from this day forward represents who Christ is inside of us. So what do you see when you look at the life of Tabitha?
Well, you see Christ. You see a loving, giving, spirit.
Anyone else?
A giver.
I'm glad you brought that up, Melva, because we don't have the dimensions of her house or her family size, or we don't know what she owned. But out of whatever she owned, she gave. A lot of people like to speculate that, she must have been the head of her household. There was never a husband mentioned or children mentioned, that she had to have many rooms. She had an upper room, this, that, and the third. And the fact is, it don't matter. She gave. It's not even that she was looking for anything in return, because that's not what giving is. Looking for something in return is a transaction. These widows had nothing to give. And so she gave to those who had nothing to provide back. She wasn't looking for anything in return. But the beautiful part of that is God called her back so that she can continue doing just that, impacting the lives of those around her. And that story saved many in the town of Joppa. Not the fact that she was a giver, but the fact that God moved through her and that she was resurrected, somebody that they knew, somebody that they could put a face to. It wasn't just a story or a folklore that they heard in a town far off. This was somebody that they knew had died. When you can't deny a blessing, when you can't deny a miracle because you're looking it in the face. So I urge you, ladies, look your miracles in the face. Realize what God has done into your lives. Every one of us is still here, even if we're fighting battles, even if we feel under the weather, even if we've had a long, rough day, even if some things really don't make sense, we're still here. And that means we're not fighting it alone. And if we're still here and we're still in the fight, then realize not only is God in the battle with us, but he'll get the glory if we use him. If we do it through him. If we do it through our own strength, that's just a Tuesday. But if we do it and we operate out of a place that we can't even reach, then that's God getting the glory out of what happened in our lives. Let God use you. This couldn't feel comfortable to anybody in that room. Not to Tabitha, who was feeling sick and then passed away. Not to the widows who had to witness that and tend to her body. Not to the men that had to travel 14 miles each way. Not to Peter, who had to leave where he was coming and praying the whole way, can I do this? Can God do this through me? God can do this through me, but will he do this through me? That wasn't comfortable for any one of them. And God may call you to a place that's not comfortable so that he could get the glory and you can have your miracle. You can have your testimony. Without that, life is just a mess because we don't know what we're doing. We're trying to follow out of the best examples we can from man, and we'll fail every time. But when God operates in us and through us and for us, he'll get the glory, just like he did in tonight's Woman of Valor. She was a woman of valor because she allowed God to use her. And she ministered to everyone that was around her. And that is my prayer for every single one of you. So let's go into prayer requests.